Welcome to Current Affairs. My name is Nathan Robinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. I am joined today by one of the country's leading labor journalists, Hamilton Nolan. He writes for In These Times and The Guardian, as well as other places. He is the author of the new book, The Hammer, Power, Inequality, and the Struggle for the Soul of Labor, available now from Hachette Books. Hamilton Nolan, thank you so much for joining us at Current Affairs today.
Thank you for having me. I love the energy that you're bringing to this book already.
Well, the book got me fired up. It's a hopeful story. It's a story of the potential that working people have to deploy their power, to seize it, which we're going to get into. So you went across the country and you talked to unionized and unionizing workers all over the place. You talked to members of the Culinary Union in Las Vegas. You talked to the longshoremen in South Carolina and Charleston. You came here to New Orleans. Hotel workers, convention center workers, childcare workers in California, Nabisco workers in Portland, a biscuit restaurant in West Virginia. And everywhere you go in this book and all of the people you talk to, there's a kind of common theme that having a union does things for people. And I want you to, maybe at the beginning here, because one of the themes in your book is that a lot of working people don't know what having a union could do for them. Tell us, in your observations, having spoken to all these people, having seen all these unions, what does having a union do for working people?
It's a great question, and a question we should probably talk about more. A union gives you power. That is fundamentally what a union does. You and I and everybody in the world who works at a job, whether your job is at a media outlet or whether your job is at a Taco Bell restaurant or whether your job is at a garage fixing cars or an office or whatever your job is. In America, most of us do not have power within the context of our job. It's not something that naturally comes with the job. You know, the arrangement in America for most people is the boss and you are the employee and you do what the boss says. And what does a union give you? A union gives you equal footing with the boss in the workplace. And it gives you the ability to negotiate along with the rest of your workers about what you want at your job. Not just money, but anything you want in the context of your job. And having a union plugs you into a national labor movement that has power and can build power, not just within your workplace, not just within your city, your state, but the whole country and the whole world. So having a union is an entryway to you having power in a way that you cannot have without a union.
Well, let me ask you to elaborate on power here. I mean, you know, obviously your book is called The Hammer. The union is your hammer, right? As you say. But I feel like we are so demoralized in this country and so often told that what our place is, that even the idea that people need power might be a new concept to them or something foreign to them. You know, you started off, you open the book with your own experiences at Gawker Media, which you helped lead the organizing drive for. You got one of the first unions in media and sort of touched off a wave of organizing there. But you point out that that was one of those kind of jobs where they tell you power. You mentioned the pancake machine in the kitchen or in Silicon Valley. We have the bean bags. You know, this is a nice workplace. Why are you talking about antagonism? Why are you talking about power? We've given you a nice place to work, but you point out that even at those places, you still need power. Why?
It's right. And it's very true. You know, I mean, I always have to keep in mind because I'm a person who's deeply sort of ensconced in like this world of organized labor now. I always have to be able to take a step back and be like, most people don't know what the fuck any of this is really about. That needs to be our starting point as a labor movement. So you're absolutely right. I mean, when we unionized, what we found as we went through the process of unionizing is like people don't know very much at all, if anything, about the most basic aspects of what a union is, what a union does, how you get a union, why you should have a union, all these things, you know. And of course, there's a reason for that. We're not taught that. No, there's no labor history classes in public schools, and this is not a part of America that is featured very prominently in day-to-day life. And furthermore, nobody's job wants them to have a union because your job knows that a union gives you power. So yes, there's a lot of kind of basic from the ground up education involved in this about what unions are and what they do. How I try to keep myself in check mentally is like when I go home to see my family in North Florida, in St. Johns County, Florida, drive in and I go to the gas station and I walk into the gas station, and I look at the people who are working in there and I'm like, what has the labor movement done for these people here? And the answer is nothing, right? That is completely untouched by the labor movement as it exists today. And like, until I can walk into that gas station and be like, these people know what a union is, until I could have a conversation with the person working the counter at the gas station about unions, that they know what unions are and they know how unions affect their life, then we still have work to do.
Well, but let me ask you, many of the stories in your book, what they do is they show people the concrete differences between the kind of life that you can have if you have a union and the kind of life you will have and the things that will happen to you if you don't. And I mean, that seems so critical is if we're talking about, well, taking people who, as you mentioned it here, but some places in the country, you say union, people think you mean a credit union, or the only thing they've heard is that unions have something to do with the mob. So perhaps you could tell us some of your observations of the differences between what it's like to have a union and what it's like to not.
When I talk to people about unions, the first thing, and I think one of the most basic differences is like when you have a union, you work under a contract. And what does that mean? That means that your boss can't change stuff. That basic concept is so foreign to most people in America. To most people in America, if your boss comes in tomorrow and is like, I'm going to need to change your hours, I'm going to need to cut your hours, I'm going to need to reschedule your hours, or we're not going to be able to give you that raise. I said I was going to be able to give you a raise, but we're not going to be able to afford it. Or we're going to have to cut pay around here. Or a whole list of things. Your boss can come in and be like, the health insurance we had last year, we couldn't afford that. So we're going to have to get a little bit worse one, and it's going to cost you a little bit more. All these things that happen at work for everybody are taken for granted. Normally in America, people take for granted that the boss is in control of the situation at work, and you are sort of the victim, or you are an entity that is affected by this all-powerful boss, and that's just how it works. And the reality, of course, is that's not how it has to work. And when you have a union, you gain the legal right, not just the civil right or the human right, but the legal right to sit down at a table with your boss as equals and negotiate a contract that is acceptable to both of you. And when you sign that contract, the contract says, here's what's going to happen for the next 3 years here. Here's what the pay is going to be. Here's when the raises are going to be. Here's what the working conditions are going to be. Here's what the health insurance is going to be. All these things are set out in a legal contract, and they can't be changed. It's a very basic feature of a unionized workplace, and yet it's something that is completely non-existent in most American workplaces, to the extent that a lot of people have never thought about it. The average person who works as a waiter at a restaurant, I worked at a pizza restaurant for years, and like the boss owned the place. He lived upstairs. It was his place. And if he wanted to change stuff, or if he wanted to fire you, or if he wanted to move you around, or if he wanted to cut your pay, like that's just what happened. And that's just how it was. And we didn't really think about that. We just sort of crossed our fingers. Mm-hmm. And a union gives you a contract that is guaranteed like any other legal contract. That is like a basic feature that can really revolutionize people's entire experience of working. Think about your schedule at work. I mean, a lot of people, especially people with low-wage jobs, work schedules that change from week to week. Every week, your boss is putting up a schedule. Imagine being able to negotiate your own schedule, to have that clarity. I mean, basic things like that are things that you get with the union. And also the ability to kind of not just have your boss's word be the final word. If your boss wants to do something, they must negotiate it with you. That is the essence of power that comes with having a union that just does not exist without having a union.
You point out that, if something is unsafe or that you're being made to do or something does violate the agreed upon terms, you have someone to go to then who can raise the problem on your behalf, who can speak for you. Because even if you've made an agreement, if your employer is able to violate it and there's nothing you can do, you might as well not have an agreement. So the union gives you someone who can come out, they can deal with the grievances that people have against the employer.
Right. There's a formal process called the grievance process, which is, your boss calls you up and is like, come into a meeting in a very ominous way. And it sounds like they're going to discipline you. You can bring your union rep into that meeting. It's a legal right, actually. Weingarten rights. You can bring a union rep to sit with you in that meeting. And if you have a problem with your boss, you can go through a legal process called a grievance process, where it's not just the boss making the final decision. You have to lay that out in front of a neutral party. So like, again, it just gives you powers that just quite simply do not exist in the absence of a union. And the fact that unions are so rare in America makes people not even think about the absence of those.
Well, yeah. No, I mean, I want to go into these basics because, as I say, as you show throughout the book, the labor movement is so weak here. You even at one point say basically we don't have a labor movement, that I think it's so important to just dwell on these basic things. And I've been rooting through the book trying to find this one tiny example that you give of what separates a union from a non-union job, which is this woman who works at in a cafe at one of the casinos in Las Vegas, and it's unionized, and she scoops gelato. And usually there are two tubs of gelato that rotate, and you can scoop out of the one that's kind of melted. Instead, the cafe started putting a tub of fake gelato in on display, and so you have to scoop the really hard gelato that isn't thawed yet. And you think, well, that's a very tiny thing. But then if any of us think to like what it's like to try and scoop really hard ice cream, it's a pain in the ass. It's very difficult and annoying. And then you start thinking, how about doing that all day with non-thawed, non-melted ice cream? And you think, wow, that would be really, really difficult and annoying. But at most cafe jobs, that would be a thing that, sorry, they now use the fake gelato. But you point out that this woman has so much she can raise this with.
Right. No, I remember that. And that woman was a fairly elderly woman who's scooping gelato, has been scooping gelato for years at the Bellagio in Las Vegas, and she has a union rep. And when they changed this gelato policy that made her life so much harder, scooping this very frozen gelato, she raised it with her union rep, who can then go to her manager and say, you know what, we have a workplace problem. And because her union, the Culinary Union of Las Vegas, is a very strong, powerful union that is well respected by the employers, or I should say, well feared by the employers, she can get results for the bad gelato policy. The manager may very well say, okay, this is not something that's worth having a fight with the union about, so let's go back to the old.
Sure.
It's a great example of like just being able to raise the concerns that all of us have at work. Everybody who's ever had a job has had little crap like that where you're like, this is ridiculous, this is stupid, this makes my life hard for no reason. And with the union, you might be able to actually change it.
And one of the things that comes up over and over in the profiles in the book is that a union can turn what could be a shitty job into a good job. It can turn what could be a low-paying job into a good middle-class job. I mean, you point out that there are all these blue-collar workers who, actually do quite well for themselves. They can take vacations. They can have a decent life. When you go to South Carolina and you meet the longshoremen, South Carolina has hardly any unions, but where it does have a union, those people get paid really well to do hard work.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to apply to become a longshoreman in South Carolina because they definitely make it more money than me, and it's a direct result. It's one of those things where it's not a partial result of having a union. It's not like semi-related to having a union. It is a direct result of the fact that they are unionized and that they have hung on to their power for all those years, and they have to fight for that. They have to constantly organize and they have to stay together. and they might have to go on strike and they have to go through tough negotiations and all that stuff, but having that union and being able to stick together as a group and negotiate as a group has allowed them to build a very, very decent lifestyle. Longshoremen who load and unload the ships in Charleston, South Carolina can easily make six figures doing that, and can live a very decent life, which, by the way, they deserve, right? Because it's a hard job.
Because they unload ships. It's hard.
They destroy your body. So, of course, it's a matter of people being able to get what they deserve. That is what it comes down to. It's not about people extracting something unfairly. There is an amount of money that every company makes. And the question is, how much of that money is going to go to the people that do the work, and how much of the money is going to go to the managers and the investors? And with the union, the people that do the work can get their fair share of the money. And without a union, it's very, very difficult to get that.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned that the effect on their bodies over years, one of the things that it will get you is decent healthcare, or it will get you a decent retirement. You point out that in South Carolina, they'll even keep you in a job. They'll find a job for you. Even they have all these older people working these very light jobs to continue making money, so that you're not just thrown away at the end of your career because there's someone looking out for you.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, for people that haven't read the book, I mean, I wrote a chapter about South Carolina because South Carolina is actually the least unionized state in America. It has the lowest union density, the lowest portion of workers who are union members in the entire country. And so I went there to sort of see what the labor movement is like there. And the single strongest union in South Carolina is this longshoremen's union in Charleston, because they are able to control the labor at this very important port that is not just nationally important, but internationally important. It's a strong port, and they've been able to build those jobs into really good middle-class jobs, and also write about, for example, the Nabisco workers in Portland, who are another group of blue-collar, factory workers who have been unionized for many, many years and who've been able to maintain that job as a true middle-class job that you can work hard. You have to work hard and you have to work a lot of hours, but you can do that and live a solid middle-class lifestyle in that city because of the work of that union over many, many decades and many, many fights to hang on to what they have, And you can look at, obviously, many other blue-collar jobs around the country that aren't unionized where that middle-class lifestyle is not possible.
You're listening to the Current Affairs podcast from Current Affairs magazine in New Orleans, Louisiana. Current Affairs is a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we depend entirely on reader subscriptions and donations. You'll notice we have no ads, no mattresses, no recruiters, no sports betting. If you can help us in our mission to build independent progressive media, please visit currentaffairs.org/donate to make a donation, or currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our beautiful print magazine. Thank you so much for supporting our work. Now, back to the program. I seem to remember that when you talk about the South Carolina longshoremen, it's something about, they have these kind of entirely make-work jobs, but they're things that could have been automated or changed that the unions fought to keep to help people who are older. And you say that there's the capitalist argument, oh, look at the costs to efficiency that are coming from the union. And you flip it around and say, look at the benefits that you could have as a working person if you had an organization that was making sure that efficiency was not the only criterion for what your employer was going to do.
Right. I mean, and you think about, this is South Carolina. This is one of the deepest of deep South states, extremely horrible to non-existent social safety net, extremely bitter legacy of racism, poor education, everything you can think of in terms of bad government and oppressive government policies exist in South Carolina. And if you are a Black person in South Carolina, working class Black person in South Carolina, where are the power structures that are looking out for you? Where are the power structures that are going to protect you as a human being? Not the government. The entire state government power structure is arrayed against you. It's not going to help your schools. It's not going to help your life. It is not going to protect you legally speaking. There's nothing there for you. And then you have this union, this one strong union that says, we are going to make these good jobs, middle class jobs, jobs that working Black people can have, that you can build a life on, that you can work for decades, an entire career. And when you get old, we'll find an easier job here for you to do. And you can continue to make money and to have an actual career. And it's just the sort of thing that, especially in hostile states, in red states, does not really exist outside of the context of a union. I mean, unions are like these little islands of hope for regular working people in so many places.
And another thing that comes up, to you go back to Las Vegas, is that when these islands grow, when they become bigger than little pockets, they build centers of political power. I mean, in South Carolina, obviously, as you say, the entire political power structure is hostile. But in Las Vegas, it's a place where the union has built into a political force. And in a country where so many of us feel politically hopeless, we feel like, the political system is something completely outside of us that we have no ability to affect. If you have organized labor, you have a phrase here, hotel room cleaners become serious players in presidential elections. That's quite extraordinary and worth dwelling on. Perhaps you could explain that a little more.
I really hope this is one of the things that people will take from the book. So much of the way that I think Americans think about quote unquote politics is sort of like this game that we watch on TV, and they're all crooks, and what does it mean to me? We're all just sort of spectators to this horrible, bitter game that's going on. And a point that I try to get across here is there's another way into political power, that's not putting up yard signs for your candidate and blah, 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 getting involved with the Democrats or the Republicans. Labor power is a road to political power. Political power follows directly from labor power. And so the Culinary Union of Las Vegas being, to me, such an incredible example of this, a union that's done this. They've been around 80 plus years. They organized the entire or close to the entire casino industry in Las Vegas, and a good part of it in the rest of the state of Nevada. So when you go to Las Vegas and you stay on the Vegas Strip at any of those hotel and casinos on the Vegas Strip, all those people are union. All the workers in those places are union. And most of them are in the Culinary Union. So they have kind of done the organizing work. You start with labor organizing. You do the work of organizing the workers. And now they have the workforces in the entire Vegas Strip. And if those properties do not pay them what they're worth, if they don't treat them as well as they deserve to be treated, they'll strike. They'll go on strike, and they will shut down the Vegas Strip. And they have shut down the Vegas Strip, and they've shut down various casinos many, many times over the years when they needed to. And that stops a lot of people from making a lot of money. So that union is taken very seriously in Las Vegas. That union is not seen as some little off to the side thing. That union can sit at the table with the biggest multi-billion-dollar corporations that run those casino companies in Las Vegas and negotiate as equals, because none of those can operate without the workers. And like you said, by doing that, the Culinary Union now is one of the most powerful political forces in the whole state of Nevada. You might be working as a room cleaner at the Venetian Resort and Casino, and the union will take you in. They will train you as an organizer. They'll train you to help do union work, and they might encourage you to run for office one day. Many members of that union have ended up running for office. So local positions, state positions, there's a lot of people who used to be members of that union who are now elected officials in that state. And because they have thousands of members who are very engaged with the union, when the Nevada caucus comes around and it's time for this very important presidential nominating contest, where are the candidates going to get thousands of people to knock on doors for them? The answer is the Culinary Union, because you know what? They got thousands of people who are engaged, mobilized, trained, and politically aware of how that election is going to affect their lives. And so the union has an army of very politically engaged members. And if you're a politician and you pursue policies that are good for working people, they will go out and help you get elected. It's a virtuous cycle, you know? And so that political power that they have now was completely built from the ground up by labor power. There's a sort of different vision of some unions where it's like we get power by writing a check to a politician to make them like us. And actually, the real power comes from having the workers, and that inevitably leads to that political power.
The word like beautiful almost comes to mind about some of the stories of the way that being organized can transform people who are like beaten down, they take crap all their life, they just have to do what they're told. And when they have an organization that is able to say, no, you don't have to take crap, people are able to really blossom. They're able to accomplish things they never thought before. They're able to have control over their lives. They're able to have nice things, and we get like a step closer to an authentic democracy. Like, what about a world where someone could be a hotel cleaner and end up in elected office? That should be a normal world. That should be a functional democracy. That shouldn't be a crazy thing. And it gets us like a step closer to a world in which ordinary, normal, working people have some level of control over the direction of the society.
Right. I mean, it's so inspiring when you do labor reporting. You run into these stories over and over again everywhere you go in good unions and strong unions. You see the union is something that has sort of given regular people this path. It's opened this door to power for regular people that a lot of regular people, including maybe us before we knew about this stuff, didn't really know that this road exists. So I meet so many people who were room cleaners or factory workers or whatever they may have been. And they got involved in the union and they saw it was like the scales fell from their eyes and they were like, this is a path to power for me. It's not about having money. It is about being a part of a unified, strong working class that uses solidarity to get power. It's like unions are kind of like schools for democracy. And the most basic form of democracy, the democracy meaning like a group of people working together to achieve goals, and by being in a union, you can kind of see that democratic action and how it works, and you can participate in it in a real way. So I do feel like the growth of unions is actually very much intertwined with saving democracy, which is like a hot topic now, but nobody talks about how important unions are going to be in that.
In the book, you say, look, it's quite simple. You say increasing union density will change America for the better. You call it the single most straightforward adjustment that will begin to reset the skewed balance of power between labor and capital. You say it'll reduce workplace injuries. It's going to more humane schedules. People are going to have a greater share of the pie. There's less sexual harassment in the workplace. People have better health care. They have a chance of a pension. You could just go there, more political power. You just go through all of the benefits that come from this. And you think, we have, what is it, 9% union density or our shriveled labor movement in this country. And you think, well, if it was doubled, if it was tripled, what is the difference that would make? And you explain that it would change the country in all these ways that would just benefit everyone. I mean, other than the people who, at the top who would lose a lot of money.
I want the words union density to be like at the center of this big national conversation. And it's for some reason we haven't quite gotten there. But I mean, a lot of people can look at America and see the various social and economic and political problems that we have. And of course, there's all types of issues always that compete for our attention. But if you sort of think about what are the big underlying things moving these, inequality, we know that there's been an explosion of inequality, particularly since the Reagan era, right? And you can look at a million economic graphs that show that, and it warps us economically, and it also warps us politically because money is political power in America. So like this huge rise of inequality is driving a lot of the other problems that people see. And when you think about fixing it, it's not going to be about taking each little issue in turn and being like, okay, let's focus on retirement security. And now let's focus on scheduling. And now let's focus on wages. And now at core, it's a power imbalance. There is a power imbalance between labor and capital is like, I feel like almost too fancy of a way to say it. It's between like humans and money. There's too much money in too few hands. And how do we fix this? You have to give more power to working people. And how do we do that? We grow unions, we grow union density. Like, if we could grow union density, so many other issues would improve. And so I really wish that we would focus more in our political conversations on this one thing, this one neat trick.
It is a one neat trick. And one of the things you point out, though, is that it, as we've kind of touched on, it often doesn't even cross people's minds that they could have this, that this is a possibility. And when it does cross their minds, you say that, yeah, okay, the laws are stacked against you. There are all kinds of organizing a union is really, really difficult. Let's not underplay that. The bosses will go to war against you. They use every dirty tactic in the book. However, what happened in West Virginia, this biscuit restaurant where, yes, they fought and they got beaten when they went up against the company, but they brought them a hell of a fight. And it was only because it occurred to this like one person. And it's only because, West Virginia has a kind of labor history where this stuff remains in people's minds, even as the state has turned red. There's still a kind of collective memory of what a union is. And it's like, okay, well, what if in more places this crossed people's minds as a possibility? It could change a lot just to have the knowledge there, just to have this feel like a path that could be taken.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we saw this when we organized Gawker, and I think anybody who's been through an organizing campaign has seen it, where like, if you organized a union 40 years ago in 1980, it was twice as likely that somebody there would have a parent in a union, or maybe their uncle was in a union, or their neighbor was in a union. Like, they would have some kind of, if not direct connection to a union, at least like a passing connection, a social connection to a union. A union would have been a more normal thing for them to hear about growing up, and union density has gotten so low, and unions have gotten so relatively scarce that it's like, when we went to organize, you really have to teach people what unions are, because they didn't grow up with a parent in a union. They didn't grow up with the uncle in a union. It does make it harder, and this is a place where I think that the labor movement itself has to take some responsibility for this. If you talk to labor leaders, they will go on and on about the horrible state of labor laws in America. And I'm fully prepared to stipulate that, right? There's oppression is real. The Chamber of Commerce is out to get you. The Republican Party wants to crush unions, all that stuff. That said, like, how do we expect anybody to organize if they don't know what unions are and they don't know how to build a union? It's the job of the labor movement itself to put union organizers in front of everybody who wants a union. And that seems like such a simple thing. And when I first got involved in the labor movement, I just sort of assumed that would already exist. And in fact, we're very far from that.
It's a very strange thing. And I wanted to touch on this with you because it's something that comes up over and over again in the book, is your kind of critique of some of the big labor unions like the AFL-CIO. It's not universal, but it is this strange thing where your default assumption might be that labor unions want to grow. They want to organize. So they're constantly trying to do more organizing, get more people in so they could be more bigger and more powerful. And you point out that that is not actually universally the case. In fact, there are unions that have almost given up on organizing, or sometimes they just set the bar very low, like the new AFL-CIO president saying that, we're going to organize 1 million new people into unions, and actually that end up being a lower percentage of union density than we have right now. So it's like they're just sort of resigned to the idea that labor is going to shrink. And I think you quote someone calling this, I believe favorably, like fortress unionism, like we're gonna, okay, well, they're at war against us, so our job is to just look out for our members and maintain the members that we have, not to grow.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, unions are institutions, and it's easy if you are the leader of a union and the dues that support the union are paid by the existing members, to just focus all your energy on keeping the existing members happy. And there's not a direct, sort of economic type of incentive for you to go out into the hostile world and organize a bunch of new workers, So a lot of unions have kind of sat on their ass and have allowed union density to go down and down as long as they maintain enough to stick around and do their thing. They're not that interested in new organizing. And yeah, fortress unionism was a philosophy that was coined, which was sort of this idea that, when the political climate was hostile toward unions, what unions should do is sort of like keep their powder dry and sort of stay inside the castle and wait for this magical day when the workers will signal somehow that they're ready to be unionized. And that's when the unions will leap into action. So, okay, if you accept that idea, then here we are after the pandemic. The popularity of unions is at a 50-year high. Everybody everywhere is talking about these high-profile organizing campaigns. Every indicator is flashing now that people want unions.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you look at the statistics, right, they just released the new union density statistics last week, and union density did not go up last year once again, even in these very favorable conditions. And oh, by the way, we got our champion elected president, Joe Biden, the most pro-union president of my lifetime, which he is, by the way. He is the most pro-union president of my lifetime.
It's just the bar is very low.
Right. It's a low bar. But, with all this stuff, we still haven't managed to move the needle in the right directions. It's one of those like definition of insanity situations where it's like, whatever we've been doing is not working. And so we need to do something new.
And, you point out that there are, different kinds of labor leaders who are, there's some who advocate this sort of fortress unionism, but there are others, you sort of return to Sarah Nelson throughout the book, the flight attendants union, who has been like a very prominent champion of the alternate approach, which is aggressive, which is militant, which is public focused and kind of evangelical about explaining the benefits of being part of the labor movement to people. Maybe you could tell me sort of why you picked Sarah Nelson in particular to focus very heavily on here.
Yeah, through the book, I follow Sarah Nelson, who's the head of the Association of Flight Attendants. She's very outspoken. She was actually one of the first union leaders that I interviewed as a labor journalist. After I got done, I was like, she's saying the stuff that I think about. She's talking that same stuff that I was talking. Very militant, all the stuff that we've been talking about here, she is right on the same page. And, when I started reporting the book, it looked like she might run for president of the AFL-CIO. That turned out not to happen, but I still kind of sort of detail her journey throughout and kind of the challenges that you face trying to be a leader in this labor movement that's so splintered. And I will say her union, the Association of Flight Attendants, for years has been in a fight to organize Delta, which is the biggest non-union airline. And if they unionize Delta, that's 25,000 new flight attendants. That would grow their union by 50%. So that's like the scale that unions need to be thinking about in terms of growth. You look at the United Auto Workers today, who have this great new leader, Sean Fain, this reformer who was just elected, who just pulled off this big successful strike. And then coming out of the big successful auto strike, there's all these non-union auto companies, Tesla, and there's a lot of non-union auto factories down south. And people were sort of like, which one are you going to go for? Which one are you going to try to organize? And the UAW came out and said, we're going to try to organize all of them. That's our plan. All of them, 150,000, every single company, that's our target. And that, again, is like the kind of ambition that unions need to have. And it's like, those are labor leaders who grasp the scale of the problem that we face and the kind of ambition we're going to need to get out of this situation.
Just to close here, your book can appear on the surface to be a work of reportage about the state of the labor movement in the country, but it's also a plea. I would describe it as an exhortation, because both at the beginning and at the end, here on page 8, you say, union is a tool that belongs to you. You may be an average person with an average job, but you can do something historic. You can start a union. You can lead a strike. This is your weapon. It's your hammer. Better America is there waiting for you. And then at the end, again, you say, try this. Join a union. If you don't have a union to join, make one. It's your right. It will make you feel good. So perhaps we could close with what your fundamental message that you have for people, what you want them to understand in this book, as well as just sort of seeing the snapshots that you give them from across the country.
Absolutely. I mean, unions are something that are for everybody. For everybody. They're not just for old white guys who wear hard hats. They're not just for specific people in specific places. Every job should have a union. That should be our baseline message. And I had the experience that I think a lot of people have had. I helped to organize my workplace along with my coworkers at Gawker Media. And when we did that and we got that union, it really opened my eyes. And I was like, this is the thing that we've been looking for. All of our complaints over the years, this is the tool that we've been looking for to solve them. And going through that experience, it was almost like if you were sick and you found a great medicine. First, you drink the medicine and you feel great and you're healed. And then you want to be like, I need to share this with people. You know, there's other sick people out there and they need to get this too. It is a little evangelical. And I want the labor movement to have the passion that evangelicals have. And we're not offering people a lie. We're not offering people a fairy tale. We're offering people something that actually works. A union is a tool that really works. It really will give you power. It really can improve your life. It really can put you on the road to political power. And we just need people, first of all, to understand that they can have this and to reach out for it, man. So, you know, if you don't have a union, get one. That's my message.
Well, to understand more how that power works, what it looks like in practice, and how it has been built and can be built, our listeners and readers should pick up Hamilton Nolan's new book, The Hammer: Power, Inequality, and the Struggle for the Soul of Labor. The great Kim Kelly, herself an awesome labor journalist and historian, describes you here as one of the greatest living American labor journalists and says you've got to pick up The Hammer, and The Hammer shows exactly why in a deeply reported work of journalism that shows endless compassion for the workers and organizers laboring to change this world for the better. And having read it myself, I have to say that Kim Kelly's right on the money there. So, Hamilton Nolan, thank you so much for joining us on Current Affairs today.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
The Current Affairs Podcast is a product of Current Affairs Magazine. If you are not subscribed to Current Affairs Magazine, visit currentaffairs.org/subscribe today and get our glorious print edition. The Current Affairs Podcast is released regularly every week on patreon.com/currentaffairs. Thanks for listening.